Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. Can you hear? Okay, good. I'm Susan James, Library Manager here at Bayliss Library and Assistant Director of the Superior District Library. And as usual, I have a bunch of thank yous. I'd like to thank the authors Julie Brooks Barber, Sarah Myrene Rapina, Andrea Scarpino, and Susan Asquith for reading tonight. April Lindela had to cancel due to a family illness, and Susan graciously agreed to fill in. I'd like to thank the Friends of the Library for help with refreshments, and Ronnie Conboy of the Friends for her help with book selling tonight. Lake State University Barnes & Noble College Bookstore provided the books for sale and signing, and we're grateful to them. I'd also like to thank Ron Rickey and Janine Rastall for their help organizing this event. They couldn't be here tonight. And the library's program committee, Debbie Lehman, Nancy Gillot, Ashley Bergeron, Maggie Johnson, and Lisa Waskin. And we have a special guest tonight, Mark Boucher, the new library director from Lake Superior State University. Plenty of other important guests, but I won't mention them all. Tonight's event is to celebrate the release of the new book, Here, Women Writing on Michigan's Upper Peninsula, and to feature some of the writers and writings from it. The anthology is described as an homage to the rich literary heritage of the region. It features poetry, short fiction, and novel excerpts. About 3 years ago, authors Ron Rickey and Janine Rastall contacted the library for suggestions of past and present authors to include in such a book. We suggested several authors, especially some featured in our local history room, Janet Loxley Lewis and Stella Nova Osborne, and they were chosen to be included. Jane Johnston Schoolcraft, the first known Indian woman writer, was another historic favorite. We're fortunate tonight to have Susan Asquith here to read from Jane's writings in English and Ojibwe. Then we'll have book contributors Julie, Sarah, and Andrea read from their poetry and read selections by other writers from the book. Afterwards, there'll be time for questions and book signing. Susan Asquith is a singer-songwriter storyteller who often performs original fur trade era music at the Johnston House on Water Street and elsewhere. Julie Brooks Barber teaches composition and creative writing at Lake Superior State University and is co-editor of the literary journal Border Crossing. Sarah Myrene Rapina has served in the Peace Corps in China, is an editor of a poetry journal, and lives in, is it Minneapolis? Or?
Minnesota. Minnesota.
Okay, Minnesota, okay. And Andrea Scarpino is the 2015 UP Poet Laureate and teaches creative writing at Union Institute and University. We'll start off the evening with Susan Asquith.
How nice it is to do someone else's poetry, so I don't have to try to explain it, but Jane Johnston Schoolcraft was one of 8 children. All of the other 7 went off to school. They were homeschooled by mom, an Ojibwe woman, and so she taught all of her children in Ojibwe, but only Jane stayed home, and she did not, I should say, she did only homeschooling. She didn't go off into sort of finishing stuff somewhere else. But her dad took her to Ireland with him when she was 9 or 10. He thought maybe she's kind of a sickly kid, and he thought maybe she would do well over with his sisters in Ireland, and he was planning on leaving her over there, but she didn't want to stay. She's too homesick. And so she came home with him, and as they were coming through Canada, the St. Lawrence Seaway, and as she was coming through, he notices that she is thrilled by just the scenery of home. And so when she gets over to Queenston in Canada, she says, "Dad, look at the trees, look at the pine trees." And I just want to read this quote because Johnson wrote the quote. "There, Pa, see those pines?" she exclaimed. "After all I've seen abroad, you have nothing equal to the deer pine." So I thought that was very fun. So I don't know if she wrote this poem, and in fact, it's questionable whether she wrote it as a 10-year-old. She probably wrote it later, thinking back to her time. And I would like to read it in Anishinaabemowin, or Ojibwe, which is what she spoke fluently with her mother and her children. So I'll read it in Anishinaabemowin, so you just get the sound of how that is. Then I'll read it in English, so it'll make more sense to you. Jingwok. Jingwok is the word for pine. Jingwok, jingwok, ningikid. Weshki wab mong jingwok. Tagwashnen neab. Enam dekion. Jingwok, jingwok nosa. Shikwea ndodas nun. Gekwa pewai jaushkozid. Mesnea shigwa tagwashnok. Sindemik anabam. Geat na minwa wabandaman. Geatawa wabandamanin. Jingwok, jingwok nasa. Shigwa kadosnan. Gawin gego kawabanang deyan. Tabishko ezau gojnayon. Jingwok waja wajaushkozad. Winet eta gnajawewe. Gawewe aje joshkozid. That is her beautiful language. And then she translated, but Jane Johnston did not translate word for word. Is much more, she writes in a poetic way, and you'll see that she writes in rhyming, whereas none of what you heard rhymes at all. The pine, I eager cried. The pine, my father, see it stand? As first that cherished tree I spied returning to my native land. The pine, oh lovely scene, the pine that is forever green. O beauteous tree, a happy sight that greets me on my native strand, and hails me with a friend's delight to my own dear bright motherland. O 'tis to me a heart sweet scene, the pine that's ever green. Not all the trees of England bright, nor Erin's lawns of green and light are half so sweet to memory's eye as this dear type of northern sky. Oh, 'tis to me a heart-sweet scene, that pine, the pine that ever green. I don't think I was supposed to, oh, there you go. Okay. I hope I wasn't supposed to introduce the next person.
Yes, you are. I'll hear about that for you. Okay, hey guys. I'm going to read a poem from here first to kind of preface what I'm going to do. And the reason I'm doing that is because I write a lot about water and fire, which is what I realized as I'm kind of putting things together tonight. So the first poem I'm going to read is from the anthology, and it's by Amy McInnes, who's actually from the UP. And I'll read her bio before I start, so you can know a little bit about whose poem I'm reading. UP native Amy McInnes' collection of poems, Cut River, was the 2006 winner of Logan House's Press's Holland Prize. Her poems have been published in the MacGuffin, Cimarron Review, Mid-American Review, and other journals. She holds an MFA from Western Michigan University. And this poem is called If One Stands Next to Lake Superior. What's a cove but a way for water to be more fluid than a lake? Some forethought, then the words, waves break, mess with molecules, like what happens in a rainstorm. Gravel and or air wriggles in, puddles and droplets keep their shapes. We should know better. It's not tension anymore, just stickiness, how a period stays in a small black circle at every major breathing point. And edge rocks are the tips of arrows, and arrows don't end any more than anything does. Or if one believes in arcs, eventually curve back to themselves and never really begin. A sudden lake wind makes me wrap my arms around myself. The integrity of a shore, needed badly. A sandy slope into cold and depth, wanted. The sweater that would have been nice to have, too long a walk away. And that's perfect for our summer that we're not really having. And I also feel hot because I can't, I'm not from here originally, as you can kind of tell from the accent that's kind of underneath my voice, but I've lived here for 9 years and I still don't know how to dress for the weather. So I think that just comes with the territory. The first poem I'm going to read is actually in the anthology, and it's from my first full-length collection, Small Chimes, that came out last year. And I'll read a couple from this, I'll read a couple from the chapbook, and I just want to check my time to make sure I don't go over. The first poem is called The Baby Discovers. Her mouth is a cavern that begins the longing of her human life. My breast, a ball, and the orange nose of her doll all warrant a search by the finely tuned buds of her tongue. Nothing escapes. Bits of torn paper and a cat's whisker are pulled from her mouth, turned over by fingers, investigated by eyes, tried again by taste. Her tongue will never want for these small things so eagerly again. Once her fingertips learn the odd tingle of sensation, once her mouth learns certain textures it touches have no taste, no smell, then she will yearn from the candies, the soft creams melting in her mouth. One day she will seek softness and warmth beyond my breast, the smoothness of someone else's skin against her lips, and every inch of her body will learn what now her tongue only knows, what now her mouth opens itself toward. A lot of these poems, most of these poems were written in the Sioux. A lot of them were written outside of the Sioux when I was landlocked in Kentucky for 7 years. And so when I moved here, the water really kind of opened something up in me. Because I'm originally from North Carolina, so I would go to the beach a lot. And my mother's originally from Savannah, Georgia, so a lot of my family's used to the lake and the mountains, and or the ocean and the mountains, so water kind of opened something up in me. So you'll see some things start to happen in the poems, like with water, but this poem is about laundry day, and this takes place in the neighborhood I live in the Sioux, and it's just a spring day. Corner by corner I hang the sheets, dark blue, red, a floral print tattered at the edges. They whip themselves into one another with the breeze, sometimes twisting into a snarl. My mother would drape her white sheets 1 over 2 lines, a tent I would run through. I show my daughter what I used to do. She follows with mud under her fingernails, hair hanging in her face, her smile the same as any child dirty among the wash. Next door, my neighbor's white shirts flap like sails, armpits stained yellow. Across the street, the widow hangs her briefs to dry. It is a bright, clear day among the houses. And the next one is a water poem. It's called Small Movements. When there is no wind, only water, when there is no movement but the tide dragging a body by the ankles out to sea, or the river filling a yard to flooding, or the simple sound of a dog lapping water from a bowl. When the sound is less than a roar, doves calling from the roof in the late morning, starlings filling the trees with creaking voices, or the dog's muted dream barking, or the shuffling feet of a nervous man as he speaks, his movement constant in the uncertainty of his own voice. Remember these small stirrings before the green water breaks over the wall, before the wind and sea become so strong you forget how to row. All right, now poems about fire. And a lot of these are actually, one of these is actually, and when I get to it, I'll talk about it, is inspired by the Duck Lake Fire, which took place about 2 years ago. I like to set things on fire in my poems. It's just happened recently, but I don't know why I like to do that, but I do. This one is called Among the Roses. Flames engulfed the garage, the living room, the bed where we'd slept without touching. I hid among the neighbor's roses and watched the fire. Like an accident on television, it happened far from me and didn't ask that I be involved. My boyfriend returned from work and parked across the street. I heard him call my name. A fire engine arrived and emptied gallons of water onto the roof and siding. I watched while my boyfriend watched, while the neighbors crowded to watch. I crouched among the roses that burst with scent as the fire fought an onslaught of water, its dark smoke spiraling into the neighborhood. The next one is actually inspired by the Duck Lake Fire. When that occurred, smoke came into the Sioux, and I remember smelling it when I was just sitting outside reading in my backyard. So this one is called Wildfire, and it's inspired by the Duck Lake Fire. The wind carried smoke into town 2 days after the fire began. It was ravenous. I knew that hunger. If it were like mine, it would not be contained. The fire would race over dry pine needles, scorched trunks, drive birds and mammals out. I read that rangers were creating backfires and flying scoop ship planes over the forest. I breathed in smoky air, deliberated driving to meet it, just to watch. And I'll read a few more from this one, and then I'll read a couple more, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sarah. Friday night. There were too many sounds offering themselves among the crowd, so you chose one that revved and sputtered, a motorbike to take to dirt roads. With a friend, you took it onto the streets after sunset, after workers had come home and eaten supper, and televisions flickered from front rooms. You made a ruckus of the night, shouting and laughing, your friend giving the small motor speed while you held on, arms wrapped around his torso, the first boy who'd ever let you get so close. Friday night, flying among houses and trees, charging through a church parking lot, the air rippled your skin. The motor gasped as it slowed as you reached the ends. You hopped off and offered your seat to another girl, adrenaline still pulsing in you, the scent of the dark, its campfire smoke and dew in your hair. In the woods. You with the fox between your teeth, you in the woods bending toward the ground. You are not grounded, others say. You are not practical. You are unmoored. You should tie yourself down. You should live in a house full of objects. You stare into the mouths that make these statements. You scruff the fox kit between your teeth, his tail twitches. You crawl on your hands and knees, rustling a floor of dry leaves. You turn your head to the deepness of the woods, a darkness no one else will enter. And the last one I'm going to read is actually a poem that's based on a fairy tale, The Marvelous Minstrel. And this book, Earth Blessed, it came out last fall, actually has fairy tale poems in it, but I'm kind of skipping over those. So if you're interested, I can talk to you more about those later. But this is based on The Marvelous Minstrel, and it's actually a fairy tale about a man who goes into the woods playing his instrument, wanting to actually draw men out, but he draws animals out instead, and he doesn't want them around, so he kind of ties them down. And I kind of imagine what his daughter might do if she saw him doing this. So this is actually from her point of view. And there's an epigraph at the very beginning, and I'll read that. So this is called The Minstrel's Daughter, and this is the epigraph. Here comes the right companion at last, said the minstrel. I never wanted beasts in the first place, just humans. She wanted what he didn't, the wolves and foxes and hares of the forest. She wanted their thick coats, their paws, their noses against her skin, surrounding her, whispering against her ear. She'd heard that wolves would harm her, but she'd also heard of boys raised by wolves and took her chances. She knew the minstrel's tune was a trick, a lure. In case they ever found themselves charmed by his song, she taught the animals how to pull their paws out from under stones and how to cut strings that tied them to the trees, his way of not letting them follow. Once she entered the forest, she never returned home. Her hair grew long and became a coat, her cloth. Her voice became soft, a set of sounds. When she needed to call out, her voice became a horn echoing through the trees, not toward the hunt, but away from it. And the last couple of poems I'm going to read, they're very short. I write short poems, so my poems never really take up any time. I'm just going to read three from a new, am I going to read three? Maybe, yes, I'm going to read three. The three that I'm actually going to read are all based in waters in some way. And this is actually from a new chapbook that was just accepted yesterday.
Congratulations!
And this is probably the strangest chapbook I've ever written in my life. So I was kind of surprised that anyone actually wanted it. Which believe me, I know a lot of you who are writers know that, gosh, this is so weird, nobody's ever going to take this, and they do. You're like, oh, okay, I guess I'm right. So a lot of these poems what I did with some of these poems is like, as I'm creating a world in which people live, and where they're kind of, a lot of these people either have body parts missing, or are in some way dismembered, or there's some kind of issue about beauty, that they're not completely whole. Actually, the book is called Beautifully Whole, which is actually just a play on this kind of fragmented characters. So the first poem is actually called The Shoreline, which I guess you know why I wrote that, because there's a lake around it. And these are all prose poems. I'll kind of show you that a lot of these are kind of written in prosaic forms in some way. And this one is called The Shoreline. A girl lived on a lake with her crippled father. and a brother who liked to burn trash. Her father's left leg was severed from the knee down. He covered the stump when he left the house, but at home its scar shone bright and smooth. Every evening, the brother started a fire on the shore. He stacked wood and slats from a crumbling shed, then struck a match. He added torn shirts, empty cereal boxes, and broken appliances. He added gasoline to make the fire burn brighter and higher. The girl washed her father's scar. She watched the fire on the shore. There was once a grandmother who diverted the brother from burning trash and taught her father to tend his scar. The grandmother no longer lived in the house or in the world. Every morning the fire on the shoreline smoldered. The next one is actually the only fairy tale poem in the book, and it's based on the fairy tale of Cinderella. It's actually the Chinese version of Cinderella, where there's actually a fish who gives her gifts and that sort of thing. So this is a retelling of that tale, and it's called Red Scales, and this is the next to last poem I'm going to read. The girl named him, and the fish outgrew every bowl she could find. His fins overlapped each rim, and water rippled out when he tried to move. Finally, she threw him into the pond behind her house, where he sank to the bottom and waited for her to call. When she did, his large head rose out of the water and planted its face in her lap. She stroked the red scales around his mouth while his gold eyes searched her face. She fed him scraps after every meal. Her stepmother stood watching. One afternoon, she put on the girl's clothes, wore his name on her lips, and killed him. But that did not keep him from the girl. She unearthed his bones from the dunghill and hid them under her bed. Whenever she prayed out of despair or desired something she knew she could not have, those bones rattled. He gave her food. He gave her pearls. He sent a gown of kingfisher feathers, and when she stroked its plumage, she felt his scales at her fingertips, the rise and fall of his breath. And the last one I'm going to read is a poem called Stone. Stone. She is a vehicle for desire, a stone figure dropped in the ocean. Curved and white, her roughness modified by the movement of water. No hair appears on her legs or above her lip. No lumps on or under her skin. No wrinkles at the edge of her eyes, and laugh lines are on her neck. Her skin is pulled taut. She is ageless, a perpetual girl. If a ship navigates her waters, it will not be rocked. She will not be the legend that folds its sails that causes the wreck on the shoreline. She is the easy route, devoid of rocks, written about in logs and travel journals, the sunshine, the stillness, the atmosphere of peace. Thank you. Come on, Sarah.
Hi, everybody. Hello. It's so nice to see so many people that I've known for so long, and so many people that I've just met also. This is really fun. I'm going to start actually by reading an excerpt, like a few sections from April Lindela's piece in here. Since she can't be here, I figure maybe I can bring her in a little bit. And since she's not here, I'll also read you her bio so that, we know who she is. So, April Lindela, Grand River Six Nations, is the director of the Center for Native American Studies and an associate professor of English at Northern Michigan University. Lindela co-edited, oh my, I didn't realize I was going to have to pronounce that. Mikwendagose. Mikwendagose. Okay. To be remembered, a showcase of photography by Anishinaabe youth from Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Lindela's For the Healing of All Women appears in the Way North Collected Upper Peninsula New Works, which is somewhere over there. Lindela's poetry has appeared in the anthology she co-edited, Voice on the Water, Great Lakes Native American Now. And it's actually a much longer piece that I recommend you try out. I'll just read a couple pages. For the Healing of All Women. Sunday morning, Baraka Powwow, 2004. July wind blew against my face. The sun felt brilliant. Lisa and I hung our dresses on hooks from the ceiling of her open porch to catch the morning breeze. Lisa's white satin jingle dress was a bit dusty after a day of dancing, but it was still striking. Her hands brushed away the dust. Hundreds of silver cones swayed and sparkled from the sunlight. Her black velvet yoke also hung with her dress, baby blue and yellow beads, an ojibwa floral design. My traditional dress is made with a deep blue velvet fabric. Numerous brilliant water birds are sewn all over, purple, pink, orange, and yellow. A circle of eagle feathers are sewn on the front. This dress is snug around my bust, but overall a nice fit. I picked up this dress from my friend Summer just before I left for Finland and just after my injury. I'm going to skip a little bit. Go to summer, 1992, so quite a while before. When you make a jingle dress, you have to be in the right frame of mind. Robel's voice was soft, but her tone was serious, parental. You have to be in a good place. Of course, it's always a good idea to smudge. I try to keep smudge going the entire time I roll cones. Robel wasn't old enough to be my mom, but her voice was confident. Her dark long hair almost reached her waistline. We sat across from each other at her large dining room table that had been converted to a temporary sewing center. A large abalone shell about the size of a soup bowl was placed between us. Gray sage leaves were made into small round bundles about the size of grapes. These tiny balls of leaves were burning steadily in the shell, creating a thin line of smoke. The smell was bitter and gave the air a slightly harsh taste, but it was familiar and felt safe. Robel shared with me the responsibilities of a jingle dress dancer as I cut dozens and dozens of Copenhagen snuff can lids. Collecting lids was not an easy task. We often had to answer to looks of confusion upon asking for the lids. Each lid carried a tart scent of tobacco and metal. My job was to trim the sides of the lid so that I was working with a flat, round piece of metal. Robel was helping me. We used scissors that were not made for cutting metal. My 23-year-old hands were tired and not as self-assured as Robel's. The muscles between my right thumb and its index finger cramped. My palms throbbed, but I continued without complaint. I held the lid with my left hand and the scissors in my right. I trimmed it in a counterclockwise motion until a slender ringlet of metal was formed and the lid itself was flat. Over and over and over again, I cut these lids, hundreds of them, ringlet after discarded metal ringlet. Vaguely artistic, prickly against my tender fingertips. Robel's method was quick and simple. Take the scissors, cut into the lid lip with one turn of the lid. Voila, flat metal. And one more section. And I will tell you before I reach the one more section that Robel talks to her while they're making the jingle dress about how she needs to say a prayer for other people. For every cone that she makes, she has to say she's praying for someone. And some people get a lot of prayers, and some people don't get as many.
Depends whether you like them or not.
And she wears the jingle dress to a few different powwows and dances in it, and various other things. I recommend that you read it. Summer 2000. My jingle dress is difficult to wash. The fabric soaked up sweat, smoke, and summer dust. The organic smell really doesn't bother me, but I haven't washed her in at least 3 or 4 powwows. It is important to wait for a hot and windy day, not a forecast easily found in Upper Michigan. I will not place her in the washing machine because of the cones, and I don't trust any dry cleaners with her. She is a sacred dress, so I hand wash her. It can be painful when the cones, formerly Copenhagen lids, cut my skin. Because of her cones, 365 of them. She is heavy. I kneel down and twist the faucet on. My white antique tub fills slowly with warm water and my knees ache as they point down with all of my weight. I lean against the tub to pour a cap of woolite into the water. I drop my fingers over the water to shake the bubbles to life. I smell, or perhaps imagine, fresh, cherry-flavored pipe tobacco as I undress the hanger. I carefully hold her with both arms. She hangs as if she has collapsed in sleep. I drop back down to my knees and place her into the tub as if I am placing a dozing child into bed. The top of the dress lies back against the tub. She looks like she is sitting up, waiting for me to wash her back. Tempered bath water is soft over my hands. She shifts as if to move on her side. My hands must move fast because she cannot stay in the water long. I carefully select pieces of her, first the stiff arms, then the front of the skirt. I rub the fabric together furiously. I turn her over and wash the back of the skirt. I turn her back again to do the top part of the dress last. This area has painting on it, and I am shy to really scrub this part for fear the paint will be altered or even ruined. I submerge her breast, collarbone, and shoulders into the water. Detergent bubbles have foamed and covered the entire dress as it is submerged. I lift her back up with one arm and drain the water. I then rinse the dress off with cold water. I squeeze bits of her here and there to wring out excess water. I hang her on a line outside to dry. She is beautiful. She is my third and favorite jingle dress. It has been 8 years since I started dancing jingle. I look at her for a while and she blows gently in the breeze, mainly maroon fabric in color with green, maroon, and pink ribbon. The maroon color is purposeful. It represents the lifeblood that we as women give each month. Our moon time is sacred. It is considered ceremony. The top of the dress, satin eggshell in color at one time, is now a bit worn and faded, but still maintains a minor sheen. At the top of the dress are paintings of roses. The edges of each petal are dark pink and naturally fade into a white flower. At each collarbone, a matching pair of rosebuds peeking out from their opening petals. This represents the stage of a girl's life, opening up to a new world around her where she will face changes, her first moon, her first kiss, and perhaps her first fast. The arms wear matching roses. One fully open, two smaller roses open a bit more than the front ones. One can see the inside petals more. This represents the young women who are not quite adults but no longer children, women who are not yet mothers but are learning how to take care of younger ones. On the back of this dress, there is a full bouquet of roses in full open bloom. These roses represent the adult woman. This is where I am in my life. I am not a mother, but I do have several children in my life and several women surrounding me on my path. This bouquet represents the collective of strong women in the full bloom of their lives. It helps me remember the women in my life, women who have helped me become who I am, women who have taught me life lessons, women who have sung with me, sweat with me, danced with me, cried with me, sat silent with me. It reminds me of the women who have laughed with me, prayed with me, taught me, learned with me. These women know who they are. It is for these women and all women that I wear this dress. She is for the healing of all women. So that was April Lindola, and now I will read a couple of my poems. This is really interesting. I've never read to so many people that I've known for so long.
Is that good or bad?
It's good, I think. I don't know. You guys tell me after it's over. So this is my poem that appears in the anthology. All I know of white, I learned from my mother when she dyed my communion dress green. Her thimbled, spit-washed thumb, her tisk. White shows every spot, she said. At home, Dad said, Kissa died, and then kept on. Shrank from the weed-eater's touch, sang the hymns of put-off projects. August was a skunk-hot lake. I held my breath, let horseflies bite. Above the bone grin of his clerical collar, Dad's face lobstered in the heat. Ran sweat rivers down the lazy boy wagon wheel plush. Shoeboxed, dirt brindled, that old white cat went rot humid all day in the parched clematis. I shoveled the hole alone. I watched shadows close on her like arms crossing to hide a lost button, a patch of blemished skin. And Julie writes about water and fire. I write about dead animals and snow, dead animals and snow. So there will be a few dead animals. Actually, I guess I also read about water a lot, but that's because I'm terrified of it. And all sea creatures, they freak me out. It's not their fault, it's totally me. So this is called lake astronomy. What do I know about flight, but that in Superior, I fear it? My feet scramble for her stony floor, but my cousins, air-boned, limbs fluent as skipping rocks, glide in. Our teacher says Leica the dog flew into space and flies there still, a star. But I know that stars are gas burning with particles, and dogs are dogs that freeze or drown, pinned down by airlessness. My cousins bob and dive, and when Superior's arm strikes coast, they're gone. I toe count one pebble for each intrepid kid and mongrel lost, unsleeping, in her frigid galaxy. But look, suddenly cousins jettison themselves free, a growling pack of stars. And this is an elegy written for a friend of mine, actually. A lot of times when I write poems, they're not actually, they sound like they're for certain people or about certain people, and they're not. I just made it all up. But this one I did not make up. This one's the real deal. I wrote it for my friend Travis, who died, 1994. Elegy with lake effect. A blizzard switched the ground for clouds and made the county blind on the day you tied a noose and dropped to quell the rising pressure of your body. I move by touch through the blank meadow of heaven. Here's the front walk of roof ice crashing, the driveway of what's underneath and splits. Flashlight, Nerf ball, jack-o'-lantern mouth, rope of bottle rocket shells. Are you that spill of paperbacks, spines cracked in puddle ice? Are you the wind that stiffens leggings on the line and doesn't give a damn that my gutters wail and rip loose from their eaves? Then I don't give a damn either. When I tear my shirt, when I chop my braids off at the nape, I'm only stockpiling beds for summer's goslings. When I kneel in the snow and scream, I'm chiseling all the lost books free by striking breath on bone. And I will end and give things over to Andrea. All the animals in this one are alive, and all the people are alive. This actually is interesting. I did a lot of research on birds and myths about birds, and it turns out that 200-300 years ago, no one knew where sandhill cranes went when they migrated, so they just made up stories about it, and they thought that they were like, oh, they go down south and they have a war with a bunch of gnomes. They would talk about this. And they also thought that they swallowed stars to keep balance while they were flying. And then they spit them out, and if you found one of the stars they spit out, if you kept it in your pocket, you lived forever. So, look for those. Lord, make me a crane. Between lake ice and evergreens, I've named them all the way we name things to remember what's stillborn to world or sky. I listen to the sandhills leave. My father says they'll swallow stars for ballast and trail carnivals to perch upon the megadrop and wonder at what happy screams the people scream while harnessed in and falling. Or find a wave of Spanish moss and casting rods and scatter underfeathers like freak blizzards, and laugh what laughs behind their wingtips at the insulated suits that shovel up and organize the ground. Or, having wing climbed into space, ease their toes into the moon's ensilvered, bubbling face. Anywhere besides this flank of gravel road, the beach glows not with discarded star stones, but with snow. I dream I'll catch a sandhill bobbing past a sag of fence, red mask blending in with deer apples that, iced into their branches, rot. She'll regard me first with eyes that blink like neon signs, then tilt her beak toward the sky and flex her knees, and will the forest finally call my name and spread its 1,000 wings?
Well, it is just an absolute delight to be here. I want to thank Susan and Ron, wherever he is on his quest in the world, for putting this together, and thank you all for coming out. It's just so nice to do readings with kind of packed crowds. So it's really lovely. I was actually going to read some of April's work too, but Sarah stole it. So I'm going to, on the fly here, change to Lisa Faye Cooley, who I had the pleasure of reading with last summer as part of the UP book tour. So she is the author of Errata, winner of the 2014 Crab Orchard Series in Poetry Open Competition, and In the Carnival of Breathing, winner of the Black River Chapbook Competition. Her poems have been awarded a fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts, scholarships to the Sewanee Writers Conference and the Breadloaf Writers Conference, and an Academy of American Poets Levis Prize. And she's also just a lovely person, so you should definitely pick up here and find her work. And this is the title poem from her collection, Errata. As the story goes, the raven's wings aren't black. They're waves, capping dark omens. Crows with curtained throats. Who knows what falls from the shelf inside us? Even gods skin their knees to bleed. The man at the end of the aisle is pocketing 2-for-1 toothbrushes. The cashier is hand-perking her breasts and picking her teeth with a receipt. I'm sorry you won't see your son, his skin peeling its white scarf through blizzards. I haven't sanded the road, won't strut across town in my ballet slippers. Your shape in this bed is my shape. Erase my whole notes from your page. 2 stoplights ago, the wind off a pickup pulled us farther from home. When I said the moonlight made graves to square off the night, I meant to say, pull over. Listen, my heart's a gutter of ravens tugging at the firmament. So that is Lisa Faye Cooley. And I will read my poem from here. And I'm actually realizing when I was talking to Julie beforehand that I have no idea why this poem is in here exactly, because it doesn't really have to do with the Upper Peninsula at all. It has to do with Persephone. So, yeah, I don't really know, but Ron liked it, I guess, so that's why it's here. So this is a poem that's kind of addressing Persephone, and many of you might know that story. She, went into the underworld and visited with Hades, and then she ate pomegranate seeds, so has to stay every year, return every year to the underworld as kind of part of her punishment, which, as the story goes, is why we have winter. So this poem begins with an epigraph from the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica, which says, "She sent specters, ruled the ghosts, and carried into effect the curses of men." So it's you all along to whom I should have prayed, ruler of ghosts, curses. I dreamed of my father night after night, wished when I opened my eyes he would be sitting on my bed, waking me to eat. Each turn down a grocery aisle, I looked for his cart filled with fruit, coffee. Driving his car, I held my hand across the passenger seat, waited to feel his fingertips. Nothing. Persephone, I know you didn't choose Hades. Know you make the best of it, loving the beautiful dead, touring the underworld with kings, using the harvest moonlight to carry out your whims. I know you don't give up your dead. But what about the weakest version of all they used to be? Slightest glint of their eyes, maybe, scent of their hair on a pillow sheet. If I offer you gifts of colored glass, fresh evergreens, silk robes, berries, if I offer to take your place 2 months of every year, if I sing at your knees, Iron Queen, I will pay any price. Just send me my father's ghost. So that is also included in my book that was out last year called Once Then, which is a collection of elegies mostly, and some poetry of witness as well. So I think I'll read another of the elegies. This is called Father as Terroir. So those of you who are into wine know about the concept of terroir. So it's kind of everything that goes into wine. So like to making a wine taste a certain way. So, you know, the grape, but also the soil and like the breeze that comes at a certain angle over a mountain that, you know, shapes the grape in a very specific way. And I really liked that idea of kind of family as being our terroirs, right? That we kind of return to again and again. So this is father as terroir. Your hands unfold in mine, limestone, chalk, clay, the way a soil drains, holds heat, erodes, the way an ocean breeze cuts through a valley, builds a fog. Hills slope, altitude, wild yeast, the way a place enters cell walls, remains, a lingering heartbeat, sugars rise and fall, blood stream. Your anger, mine, your days of rain, your hair, my hair, your eyes. So I lived in Los Angeles when there was one of the big anniversaries of the Charles Manson murders, which I know is kind of a weird anniversary, but it was a really big deal at the time, and there were all of these articles that quoted the book Helter Skelter about the Manson murders. So I thought I would read this poem because the man who wrote that, Vincent Bugliosi, just recently died, I think yesterday. And he was a really interesting man, I think, in a lot of ways. He continued a writing career. He was the prosecutor for the Manson murders, but he was also a really good writer. And so he continued a career writing kind of crime-centered books of all sorts. So this is a poem called Omniscience, and it begins with an epigraph directly from Bugliosi. And he said, "Where was God in the LaBianca home and the Tate residence? Christians believe God is omniscient, so evidently he was there those nights and just decided not to do anything. God said quiet, and quiet spread. God said night, and night took hold of everything. Red songbird throats, red shawl of sunrise. The earth on its axis held its breath. The ocean stopped to stare. Here, God said, dusty summer road, tire treads, electric gate. Palms opened to say, wait. Palms opened against knife blade. Break, God said, and breaking spread." So my father was a microbiologist, and he was a devout Catholic his entire life, which is something sometimes people don't think go together, right? We think if you're really into science, you're probably not going to be religious, and that is not the case at all for him, and I think it's not really the case for most of us. So I have this series of photographs from him that I love. They're black and white photographs, and he's wearing his lab coat that you would have kind of, think back in the 60s when scientists wore lab coats. And he's teaching nuns how to do science. So there's kind of microscopes, and he's pipetting and things like that. And they're wearing their full nun gear. Habit, thank you. So this is a poem that's kind of based on those photographs. It's called My Father and the Nuns, 1956. Microbiologist, teachers of parochial school, my father in his white lab coat, the nuns in long white robes, black habits covering their hair. They came to learn the news, double helix DNA, evolution's sway, so science class could meet state rules. He taught them to pipette, swab petri dishes with cotton sticks, wipe down the countertops with iodine. They studied water drops, grew staff on slides, counted microbes one by one, signs of God like strings of beads through chalky hands. I think I'll just read two more here. Somebody who's been a really big influence in my own writing is a poet and nonfiction writer and undertaker, of all things, Thomas Lynch, who's actually based down right in the Lower Peninsula a little bit in Traverse City, I believe. He's like a fourth generation undertaker, and he writes really eloquently about his work and about just many things having to do with life, I guess. So he comes up throughout this book. I kind of use him again and again, and this is a poem called Comfort that begins with an epigraph from him. So Thomas Lynch said, "To name a few out of the countless stars was a comfort. You named the beasts, opossum under the porch, sundown, raccoon, white-tailed deer, sunrise, chickadee, morning dove we fed from our hands, cottontail. Your only child you named the Greek for womanly, taught olive wood we prayed between our fingertips, taught microscope, pipette, autoclave. Your words an index, ordering. Now my only comfort found in saying what you named, espresso, anisette, the little bear outside my window, nights I cannot sleep, footprints of the dough like memory." So I think I'll just read one more, and then I guess we can have some time for questions and answers and cookies and things if you folks want to chat with us a little bit. This is a poem called Relative Motion, and it's kind of loosely based, although my father would be horrified to hear this, on this habit he had of really abusing the car horn. So he didn't just, like honk the car horn once in a while. He honked it constantly. Like when he was making a left turn, he would start honking. When he was backing up, he would honk. When he was going forward, he would honk. I think he just liked it a lot. And it was something that I found just horribly embarrassing as a child. But after he died, it was something that I really missed. So for years, every time I heard a car horn honk, I would kind of look and see if it was him. So this is a poem called Relative Motion. And you who once were bustle, quick step, race, water running for a shave, radio playing, basketball games, mowing, cooking, tinkering, hospital bed, most still I'd seen. I stared at your chest, swore I saw you breathe. 5 years you didn't drive, and yet I listened for your car horn beeping up and down the street, red Thunderbird, station wagon, Jeep, short blasts of home, I'm home, a mile away, or early morning light before the paper came, I'm leaving, going, gone. Thank you. How would you like to do things, Susan?
I guess you all can sit up front. I'm sorry the chairs aren't higher, but
Okay.
thank you very much for those readings, your own and others. And I'm glad April Lindela was thought about, even though she couldn't be here. Does anyone have any questions to start? For anyone? Very.
I was wondering if this question is for Susan. First of all, everybody was wonderful. So nice to have such an amazing reading and it's great. But my question is for Susan. The Jane Johnson Schoolcraft poem that you read, I was wondering if you could give us just a taste of a literal translation, like maybe the first few words, so we could hear what I felt like it was so beautiful when I heard it in Ojibwe and it sounded so different in English. I'd be interested to just hear the words translated one by one. Yeah.
Well, it says pine, the pine, actually, the Shingwok is the pine. The pine, I said. Weishki, which really was her grandpa's name, but the translation she translated as the pine, my father, but really the pine really was what Weishki was her grandpa. Weishki, you saw it, the pine. And then it says, I'll come back to the place where I was, and the Guillaume. That's, one long word like that means to the place where I was. Okay. And so and then she goes Shingwok, and then Nosa, is just sort of an expression. In Anishinaabe, you would say, Anishinaabe, it means in Ojibwe, I could say. In Ojibwe, you would say something like sa or gwa or gwana. Those are words that have only a feeling. There is no translation of a word, but only a feeling. So she wrote about that. She was typical for her to write about how life was hard and painful, because she did experience a lot of probably clinical depression, mostly because her husband was forever gone. And she lamented that a lot. And she wrote about death because it was a familiar thing. In those days, you never knew. There were no phones or anything at that time. There were letters took a month of Sundays to get anywhere. So when someone left you, you did not know if they were going to be back ever or when. They would be, and so her poems were about that. But the translations were done by her and sometimes by her husband, Henry Schoolcraft. And so one of the poems, he translates for her. He calls it a free translation. Her poem, it translated just plain, is, I'll say, 30 words. His translation is, I'll say, 1,000 words. So translations are a very tricky thing. I didn't read that one too, because that's more Henry than Jane. So the translations are quite difficult in between languages, and in Anishinaabe, the culture, if you don't know the culture, languages carry the culture. And so thank you for asking that question.
Anyone else?
Anything? The book is organized by seasons, and I just wondered if, there's a particular season that especially inspires each of you, or your work in particular.
Winter.
Winter?
It's crazy there.
I don't mean to always write about winter, but every time I finish a poem, I'm like, there's the snow again.
Especially when the lake thaws, and the way it smells so good. So just the water, I think just the presence of water, whether it's rain, whether it's snow, whether it's, the lake itself, is always just kind of present with me. So, but there's so much moisture in the wintertime, I guess that's kind of what, yeah.
For Susan, not for Susan, her daughter Jane. For Jane, she wrote about 50 poems. She did translations of stories as well, but about 50 poems. And if you're reading through them, it seems most of them were in the summer. I mean, I don't recall very many winter poems, but there would be winter stories that she did.
Yeah, I have to go with winter too, actually. Yes, there's a lot of, when I lived in Los Angeles, I wrote a lot of poems that had fire and heat and desert, and then when we moved here, it changed very quickly. Which I guess is maybe just to say that the surroundings affect us all so much as writers, that you're just attuned to seasons and what's happening around you.
Well, I also feel like I get more writing done during the winter.
Do you like batten down the hatches mode?
Yeah, when I'm stuck inside, I get more work done. During the summer, I'm probably less likely to get work done unless I force myself.
I just want to follow up with what you just said, how you guys were talking about the seasons that inspired you to write, and it was interesting how you used the word work, and I'm sort of throwing this out to all of you. How do you see writing? Is it work, or is it something that just, you have to get out? Or how do you see the actual craft that you just shared with us?
I mean, I think it's work. I think it is something that I feel like I have to get out. I mean, I've been writing poems since before I could read. Before I could write. Like, I have poems that my mom typed on a typewriter that I recited to her, because I think I was so in love with language and I just wanted to record language, but I also think it's really hard and it's horrible and sometimes I hate it. And sometimes it doesn't go well, you know? I think for this book, there's 60 some odd poems, and I have a folder on my computer that's just called crap with like 150. So, you know.
You should submit them and see if anybody publishes.
Yeah, I don't know,
Publish that one.
but yeah. So for, you know, 60 published poems, I wrote 150. That didn't work, you know? So there's, I don't know, I think there's a lot of work in crafting, and I may go through 15, 20, 30 drafts of a poem.
Yeah.
And you're still not satisfied with it.
Right, and I still am like, oh God, why did I choose that word, right? Yeah, I don't know.
When for Jane Schoolcraft, she a typical title for her work would be Lines Written at Castle Island, Lake Superior. That was one of the, and she would frequently write Lines Written at. And a number of her poems are poems about the loss of her son Willie. He was 2 years old. He got sick with probably the croup. He died within 2 days. Mm-hmm. And she was pregnant with another child. She just could not get this out. So the pain that she experienced had to be washed away somehow, and she did that by her poetry. But you should know that her dad, John Johnston, wrote poems all the time. And so even as a little girl, she always wrote poems back and forth to her dad. Her dad was another person that was forever gone. How did he have 8 children? But anyway, he was gone a lot, so they would write letters. And although it took a long time to get the letters back and forth, the letters were in poetry form. And so Dad wrote, she wrote, and her husband Henry also wrote in poetry. So it was considered just the normal way of writing. And I don't see her, from the things that I hear her writing, she was also quite spiritual, I'll say, or religious. And so she wrote a lot like that. It just seemed to pour out of her as a way of just being in the world.
Now, did he treat the rest of his children like that, or was she in some way special to him? Or?
She was, people said, and Henry also, her husband also said, your dad favored you. You know, I mean, it was kind of like that. But yes, he wrote poetry, but I don't recall that any of the other kids engaged in poetry. George, the oldest of the boys, did quite a bit of writing, but it was business letters and that kind of thing, whereas Jane just wrote because that was in her nature's work.
I think, like, this is something that, like, I go back and forth on all the time, like, because we always talk about, like, I talk to my husband and say, okay, like, I have to work now. Like, I have, you know, I have to do 2 hours of work a day, or we don't eat, you know, or whatever, right? And so, like, I always talk about writing his work, but then sometimes, like, I'll get, like, too worky about it, and I lose the magic, and all the poems suck, right? I mean, not that, right, you have to do 150 to get 60 ones, right? So there's always the suck. But like if I'm not, you know, but like so it's like, I feel like it's this constant balance of like work and magic, right? And actually I was remembering, when I was an undergrad, I was sort of on the fence, and I was like, I'm sort of a writer, I don't know, like maybe. And my writing teacher, who was really a mentor to me, like she sat me down in her office one day and she was like, okay, starting right now, writing is your vocation. And like, I don't care what else you're doing for money, like this is your vocation and that's what you need to think now. And so I think that word sort of implies like both like the sweat and the magic.
It just depends on where I am. I mean, sometimes if I think, I really, right now I love research and I love drafting. And revision I sometimes like, depending on what I'm doing and why I have to revise. Yeah. And just recently I came back from a residency, so I've been putting a book together. I think sequencing is work, and I think line editing is work, and I think thinking about tense changes in poetry's work. But it just depends on where I am. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that stuff.
Because I love those things.
Okay. So yeah, it just all depends. And sometimes I really hate first drafts, but that's usually if I haven't written for a while, you know. So it just all depends on where I am. But I do have to say that some of it is work. I mean, you have to actually make yourself sit down. The work's not going to get done if you don't sit in the chair at all. I mean, I even tell that to my students who are writing my comp papers. You don't sit down, it's not going to get done. It doesn't fly out of your head fully formed. It just doesn't do that. So.
I would like to say that I write, you might say, poetry in the sense of writing songs. So in writing songs, I feel like it is a kind of, it's a work. I would say it's a kind of a work, but it is so much fun that like my husband says, you're working all day, but I'm knitting, or I'm studying language, or I'm writing something, and so it doesn't feel like work to me at all. And so I would just say that maybe work is a defined term.
I tend to think too that if you have to work and you don't enjoy it, it's not worth it.
Very important. Yeah.
Everybody, I think you should choose that kind of work that you really enjoy doing, that you would enjoy doing if you never got any kind of recognition or got paid for it or anything.
Good thought. So we had a question back here.
Do you ever get in a zone where it isn't work, where it's just flowing?
I write in so much in fragments because I'm a mom. It flows for me. But maybe sometimes. I mean, I do go in kind of little spurts where I have something I'm really obsessed with, and that might be a zone. So, but as far as like sitting down for hours, I don't ever do that because I don't really work that way. I kind of have to work in fragments and things come together kind of slowly for me.
I don't usually, things are always, I feel like it's always just difficult, but I do find that like if I'm really good and I say, okay, you have to sit down, like keep your butt in the chair for like 2 hours a day, like somewhere around like the 10th day, I usually hit a sweet spot, right? And like that's when like I hit a zone and things start flowing. But like it doesn't really just happen for me. I always pictured it, I was like, I'll be a writer and like magic and like I'll just be like writing all night, and that never happens for me.
I don't know what to say on that. I guess I would say that I'm surprised a lot of times how the words come out. I'm writing a song. I'm generally writing songs about history things and about the Great Lakes. That's the kind of songs that we've done. And so I would have to say that suddenly the words all just go there. Everything is rhyming. In music, I'm looking for rhyming. And in fact, there was this book, which is by Bob Parker, about Ojishkade, well, not Ojishkade, it's Bama Wawagijikakwe, which is Jane Johnson's Ojibwe name. Her mother, all of the children had Ojibwe names. Because their mother only spoke Ojibwe. But in any case, it was, Bob said that her poetry needed to rhyme because that is what people expected in those days. Yeah, so if you're looking for sort of free-form poetry, it was, people would say, well, what kind of thing is that? And so, so I think she, she may have
I don't
rhymed.
mean to be, pardon me, I don't mean to be rude or anything, but do you ever run into somebody who understands what you're talking about? Because I don't.
That, do you mean in Ojibwe? Or?
No, any of you, all of you.
Oh, you mean, do you mean that the poems, sometimes as you're listening to the poem, you're thinking, what the heck is that about? Yeah, I have heard that a lot, and that happens to me a lot. Was it Renee, were you mentioning something about the idea that you don't have to like everything? Like if you go to a restaurant and you look at the menu, you're thinking, oh, for God's sake, this stuff, the fried ants are not appealing. And so you would not be expected to like everything on the list.
It's not a matter of liking, it's not even knowing what you're saying. I mean, I don't get it.
I feel like you too. I often don't get it. And so what I like is when I get a book like this, because I feel like, I in a way, I have to kind of study it over You know, it's almost like buying a painting, you know, so that I have it at home, because some people are steepers, like a tea bag, you have to kind of steep in it for a while, and that's the way I just don't get it. People read their poems, and I'm thinking, shoot, I missed the whole thing. And so I feel like you, I don't know.
I do a lot better, like, if I can see the poem. Like, I sort of wish that at readings, like, we would hand out, like everyone would get a handout. Because I do great, like, if I can see the words, but actually even, like, a lot of the time if I can't see them, because I'm really visual.
See, I don't care when I don't understand. Like, I'm totally fine not understanding. I do think that poetry takes a lot of work. It's hard. We're not used to it, in part, right?
Yeah.
That it's become, for a lot of reasons in the US, a very kind of separate art form. But that's not the case, in most places, and it hasn't been the case in the US for very long. And I think I often am really interested in the sounds and listening for beautiful images, and I'm okay if I don't understand a poem at a reading. If I've, walked away with a sound or an image or something that really captured my attention, that feels like enough for me. Maybe like the painting at a museum, like I'm not gonna get every painting, but I'll walk away with this like beautiful landscape in my head or something like that.
And a lot of times, even when I'm writing to read, and a lot of times before I write, I will read maybe like a section of a collection of poetry, and I may not understand every poem, but the words are starting to get into my head, and images are starting to get into my head, that's like you're saying, and the music's starting to get in, so that I feel that, okay, now I can sit down because I've got this rhythm with me, and I can start to write my own work. So a lot of times it's just a matter of, it just kind of helps me get into, I guess, the mood of writing.
Yeah.
And something might jar me to think about something in a certain way. So, and I might not every poem will hit me. Like I was doing that this morning, I read 2 sections of a book, and not every poem hit me, but some did. I was like, oh, that's interesting way to think about
I
that.
think probably Sarah's right that I need to see it.
Yeah, and I'm very visual too. I need to see a poem. It's sometimes I can get myself into the poem when it's being read, but a lot of times I have to be kind of connected with an image or something to kind of pull me all the way through. Like I love the poem about your dad driving. I mean, it was just like, oh, I can see everything. I can see everything. I can see it all. And so it really kind of helps me pull me in.
But that was easy to understand, I think.
Yeah.
Well, because we had the background information on it to begin with, but if you came on it cold, there's a lag. You have to find the interpretation, and you're always a little behind.
Well, and I think that's why at readings a lot of times poets do give you some sort of, description or kind of summary, because I think it is hard. It's a hard art form to jump into cold.
Oh, yeah.
Well, if I can interject, you know how there's always this song that you really loved when you were young, but then you sit down with the lyrics and you realize that you don't recognize the lyrics, even though you've heard the song 100 times. And it's like that. Listening to the song, you might get halfway through and all of a sudden there's this one line that really just hits you and takes you out of the song and into your own thoughts and feelings, and you may not even notice the rest of the song. So to some extent, listening to poetry is along those lines, where the purpose isn't always to understand the poem, but just to find some little gem in there that brings something to you.
I mean, there are some poets who only work with sound. Someone recently that I read was just so, and it was somebody that someone else had told me about, and I can't remember his name. But he pretty much works with sound and likes words that kind of sound like each other, and he's kind of wordplay all through the poem. And so the poem, when I hear it, makes no sense to me, but I love hearing it. When I first hear it, I have to go back and read it a couple of times to actually understand what he's doing, but to hear it is just fascinating because it's just wordplay. It's just playing off the sound. And some poets just do that. I mean, so a lot of poets do just so many different things. It is kind of, it's kind of like, it's just a vast sea of different styles, and it's absolutely fascinating to me.
It seems to me like poems that tell a story, like Casey at the Bat. That one, it's a story, and so you're drawn into it. You tell it. It's a rhymed story, and so that kind of a thing is easier to get. And sometimes if people, like one of the poems that Jane does, she's describing how pretty everything is, the leaves and the water roaring and everything. And I'm thinking, I could, give me more meat than that, Jane, I'm thinking, because that's what I want, I want to hear a story, and I want to hear that little, like Frank is a poet too, and so in Frank's stories, and also in Renee's stories, their poems, they're saying something, you get it, and it's like a story, you're expecting it, right at the end, they twist it like that, like a little knife right in your belly, and so it's so different. And so in that, I feel like that kind of a poem really does, it draws me in. It's like a little story, and then it's that cool twist right at the end that thinks, oh, that's so fun. I like it, So, yeah. But Frank, I really love that idea that you said where it isn't the whole thing. Once when I was a younger person, I was a churchy person, and so one of the priests said, when you come to Mass, I was a Catholic. He said, when you come to Mass here, there are so many things going on. But there's the readings, the songs, the prayers, everything. But then he said, really, sometimes it's just one thing that you came for. Just that one idea. And tonight, I'm going to walk away with your idea of your teacher saying to you, this is who you are. It's your vocation. And that's going to be my takeaway. And so if all I have tonight is, if everything turns into a mishmash, by the time I leave here, that's what I'm taking. Yeah, the one thing. Yeah.
I think also, thank you for saying this. I think also, like, one of the things, like, when I work with, I teach classes here and there in town, and I often, like, my students will come in, and it's like poetry and it's fiction, it's all these things, and they'll say, well, I don't get poetry. And I'm like, yeah, like, poetry's weird, and it's hard, but I think, like, a lot of my students come in, and, like, they think that they're supposed to, like, that there's one answer to, like, a poem, right? Like there's one answer, and, like, I've read this poem, and I don't think I have the right answer, right? Like, there's a key somewhere that they just don't have. And, like, I don't think that's true, right? Like, I've met people and they're like, oh my God, I love your poem, right, whatever poem, right? And to me, the poem is about, monkeys, playing basketball, right? And, like, someone will be like, oh my God, I love your poem about, kitty soccer. And I'm like, wow, I guess it is about kitty soccer, Like, and I feel like, so at some point, some of us in school, I think, got the idea that, like, poems have one answer, and they have as many answers as, like,
what was the writer thinking?
Yeah,
well, the writer,
doesn't matter.
We don't even know what we're thinking.
I don't know I have no idea. Now I really want to write that kitty soccer poem.
No, and true art will speak to us that way. That what your intent and what I receive may not be the same.
Right. Well, that's one of the reasons why I'm so against biography when it comes to artists and poets. Is because I know that a lot of times that has nothing to do with their biography, unless it's completely confessional.
Right.
It has so little to do with their biography because a lot of our lives just inspire what we write.
I think it would be nice, though, if sometimes I would get what you were really saying.
I love your honesty. That is so
But I realize that everybody takes away a little bit of, something different. Of course they do.
Yeah.
But I would like to know if what I get was what you meant.
Well, but see, this is the trouble is I'll lie. Like you're saying, we don't know what we're doing. I'll lie. Sometimes I'll write, this book is broadly based on my dad, but if he read this, he would be like, what the hell? This has nothing to do with me, right? And that's because there may be a father figure, sometimes I jump from, there's one story I'm based on, but it's not the truth, right? This isn't a memoir. So I think, we don't really know sometimes we lie, we make stuff up.
That you were a bunch of liars.
Well, it's art, we're creating worlds and sounds and.
Sometimes reading Sarah's poetry, I recognize some events when she was a kid that it's very loosely based on.
Yeah.
And so it's not the real story.
It's a memory of the event of the story, right?
Yeah, or even sometimes not, right? Like, he never talked to me about cranes, but the poem says that he did. We should talk about cranes later.
So it can be true.
Yeah, so it can be true. I love it.
Where do they go?
Huh?
Where do they go?
I think they go to Florida. We live in Florida.
Some go to Louisiana.
All of them seem to go
Which
to
is a lot of
Florida.
Everything goes to Florida. Because there's snow.
You have that experience, great experience.
You know, one time I thought I wanted to write prose, and I found it very boring. And I tried poetry, and it seemed like what I was writing in 8 pages, I could write in a quarter of a page, and somehow or other, you got the message and the imaginative element out quicker. You know, that, in fact, I wrote a poem once on how poetry is different from prose, but I mean, it's an artistic concept, but still, you know, prose doesn't, I mean, I like a good book, but I mean, I'm not studying the whole thing, you know, and I don't come away with some kind of a unified imagination as I do in poetry.
Yeah, we're creating a world for you. I think it's what poets do. We create worlds, you know, and we create moments too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fun to do that. It's fun to recreate things.
Well, I think just the condensed nature of poetry, I mean, unless you have a translation of like 10,000 words or something. I mean, I think most of our poems are really very short, so you don't have very much time.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have a 300-page novel, you waste a lot of those sentences, right? They don't really do much.
But that's the crafting, I think, to put in
Yeah.
one line so many images. And,
That's the fun of it. Yeah.
But one thing that I really enjoy is I enjoy creative nonfiction a lot, and then there are some nonfiction writers who are very poetic, who write lyric essays, that I really think of them as poets in a lot of ways. So that's another form, that's another genre that I really love, is people who can do that. I mean, nonfiction blows me away, some of the things that people can do.
I'm always amazed because you have to make the words beautiful, and then they also have to be true. That's the part, like I could not be that beholden to the truth.
Well, you know, it's almost you have the glimmer of the truth too.
Yeah.
I guess you can take it little. I don't know. I still
In the
think that.
book that is, what's the name of this book?
Here.
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 Okay. She says, here? Yeah. One of the writings that Jane Schoolcraft did is really, it's a short prose, and it's about reindeer, Ren. And she writes it in French because they were trilingual, at least quadrilingual, and maybe all the kids, but all the Johnston kids. But she wrote. It was really just I thought just a paragraph out of a science book. It sounded like to me, you know, in the sense that she was explaining how reindeer were used and how good their meat was, and I mean she was going on about that, and so I thought that was a kind of an interesting piece that she wrote. It was described as a Christmas gift to her husband. Yeah, and so it's an interesting piece because it, just as you said, she was trying to express the truth in an interesting way. You know, try to take an image. You have an idea. It's so ephemeral. You know, you haven't even put it in your own mind good enough yet. It's just sort of a feeling, it's a haze. And then gradually you put it in thought, which kind of settled it up a little bit. You actually put words in your mind. And then you actually have to put the words on the page or in the air. And then somebody else has to pick it up, either visually or auditorily, and somehow make it a picture in their own mind, put it all together. And so that communication process is so complicated and so full. And so that's what I like when people write something that is intelligible to me. And so I forget which one of you, but some the poems, the way you said things, I just thought, which one of you had a poem about a dog, the sound of a dog lapping? Was that you? Yeah. And so I thought to myself, I know exactly how that sounds. you know, and I mean, and the sounds, the other sounds in that particular poem, I could really tell because I had the experience already. I was ready for that to come in, and so it made sense to me. And so I thought, well, that is an interesting process. As a poet, you're trying to use the fewest words, but the ones that make the images that really resonate. They hit you like, not bounce off. Like come in.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sure we could go on, but thank you so much.